evacuate in an orderly fashion. Just note the exit signs, be aware. We don't anticipate that, but this is a requirement when we have an audience here in Leonard Auditorium. So with that out of the way, I would like to say welcome and thank you for taking an interest in school safety and what Hamilton Southeastern is doing, along with the City of Fishers, to promote a safe environment for staff and students. I'd like to call special attention tonight to some of the special guests who are here. We have great involvement of our elected officials in the Hamilton Southeastern Schools. We have our school board here. We have members of the City Council here tonight. We have members of our General Assembly here tonight. We welcome all of you and thank you for your support and your involvement. Back in March, late March, the Hamilton Southeastern Schools held a focus group to discuss school safety and the situation that we now find ourselves in as a school within the greater society. And so when we came away from that meeting, we had a few different requests from our citizens there. There were about 50 in all. It was an invitation-only session, and it was to precede a meeting such as this. And this was one of the requests. Could we have a community forum, a community meeting where we make even more people aware of what we do, what the city does to promote safety? One of the other requests that we had, though, was to help parents discuss in a developmentally appropriate way how we have conversations about school safety, how we have conversations about violence and dealing with safety. Another issue that we were asked to talk about was perhaps examining the feasibility of expanding our number of school resource officers within the schools. So this is a continuation of that conversation, made more urgent, of course, by the incident last Friday in Noblesville. And I would like to also say at this point in the conversation that the incident in Noblesville could have been handled no better by any other school and community anywhere. I have great compliments for the work of Dr. Beth Niedermeyer and the team at Noblesville, as well as the entire Noblesville community and the Hamilton County community, which came together to support Noblesville schools. So with that out of the way, I would like to also recognize we have a panel of speakers tonight who will discuss with you what we are doing to promote school safety, to ensure the well-being of our students. We have our mayor with us tonight, and he and I are working together to MC this panel discussion. I encourage you to listen very closely. The mayor will give you some tips on how we are going to gather your ideas and your thoughts. Thank you for being here again tonight, and Mayor, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Dr. Borf. A logistical note tonight, part of what we're going to do tonight is share with you the work that is already underway around keeping our community and our schools safe. But ultimately, we also want to hear from the public here tonight. And so to do that in an orderly fashion, we've asked our stigma-free HSE students, which is our mental health stigma-free group at HSE and Fishers High School, to be here tonight to hand out cards. So they will be going around the audience handing out cards and pens. And if you have a question you would like to share with the City of Fishers and with the school system, please feel free to write down that question and raise your hand. We will collect those cards, and our panel and Dr. Borf and myself will answer those questions as we go along. Also, there'll be another card with you, and feel free to leave those with our volunteers tonight as you exit the building, and that's really takeaways. So if it's more of a comment or a concern or a forward-looking statement, please feel free to write that down and share that with the individuals as you walk out the door, because we do want to take away from tonight your impressions of of what we're doing well, what we can continue to improve on. The other thing that I would just touch on before we turn over to our panel of experts is, in many ways, Dr. Borf and I are walking in the footsteps of leaders that set the foundation for this relationship between the city and schools many years ago. This ability to take a phone call from Dr. Borf and have a conversation about what we need to do and work collectively didn't happen overnight. This is a relationship built on honesty and trust and integrity between the city of Fishers and our school system. And tonight, the panel that you see reflects kind of that manifestation of a desire of our community to ensure that we are working seamlessly together towards some of these complex issues. I think one of the things that you will hear tonight, and a common theme that will be reiterated over and over again, is the city and the school system are only two parts of a broader component to really solve this issue. We are going to look to our community, to our families, to also help in identifying people who may be in need in our community. So I look forward to the panel tonight, and I thank you very much. And please feel free to write down any questions you might have, raise your hand, and our volunteers will take those. And leave your thoughts with us as well as you exit tonight. With that, I will turn it over to our first panel speaker. Thank you.
Good evening. I'm Mike Beresford, Assistant Superintendent here at Hamilton Southeastern Schools. One of my duties is to oversee the school safety program. And let me just begin by saying, you know, when there's a shooting in a school, it cuts all of us to the core. School people, we're responsible for your children, and many of us are parents. And then parents, it cuts you to the core, and it really cuts to the core of everyone in our community. And we have to kind of go into it realizing that we're in a kind of a shaky position right now because we've had trauma right up the road from us. And what we're going to try to share with you tonight is just a little bit of a peek behind the curtain of school safety and how our relationship with the city and especially Fishers Police Department and Fire work together to make our schools the safest they can be for our students. And we are unrelenting and always trying to find what we can do to make our schools safer. I've always said this over and over again to several different groups, but the number one factor, the number one way to keep our schools as safe as possible is our students. Our students are the eyes and the ears of our schools. And the information that they have, they know what's going on when we don't know what's going on, and you don't know what's going on. And they are key, especially in the upper grades, but also in the lower grades as well, to let us know what's going on. And then our second source of information is this group right here, the parents and the community members. You're the eyes and ears out in the community. I've had parents call me, I heard something in the carpool today that I thought you might need to know. And you get that information, and our staff hears information, and that information gets funneled to us where we can react to some things that may not be right. The whole notion of see something, say something is very, very important. It's a key component of keeping schools safe. The third component is other information we pick up off of social media and other sources. But all that information has to get to the proper folks to be able to react to that. One of the most effective things we've done in the last 6-7 years actually came from one of our school resource officers who attended a NASRO conference, and he came back with a text-a-tip program. And what text-a-tip was, it was just basically a call system where kids could give confidential information, and parents as well, and they could send that information to us, and it goes to like Utah or someplace and comes back without their phone number on it. And we communicate that to the students. Now, the wonderful thing about text-a-tip is that a kid can send in confidential information and say anything like, hey, I'm really worried about my friend. I think they may be suicidal. And then where before we just had this information, we wouldn't know who the kid was, we wouldn't have anything to work off of. We could text the student back and say, do you feel comfortable telling us who it is? Why do you feel that way? And then they answer us. And the way that young people communicate today is through text. And that has been really golden for us. Now, we do get silly ones every now and then. We'll get the, hey, there's a junior parking and senior parking. Or I got one time that said, this class is so boring, I'm dying in here, someone please come and help. So the kids do have a good time with it. But I can tell you that we have saved lives through the Text and Tip program. No doubt, because our kids know when something's wrong, they need to say something and do something. And if they're afraid or they're not comfortable, they send that text and they start connecting back and forth. And a lot of times, Mike Johnson down here will say, do you feel comfortable in talking to an SRO or a school counselor? And they say, yeah, I'll do that. And then they go down to the school counselor and we connect with them that way. So that's been very effective. But I can't emphasize enough the importance of that communication line in the world of prevention. And when we talk about preventing, bad things happening in school safety, the information that we get from our students, and from the parents, and our staff, and our community is just golden. And it's a wonderful thing to have everybody gathered here and care this much about our schools and about the safety of our students. And my heart's really warmed by that. The other thing I want to emphasize is the positive relation we have with our city and our police. Mike Johnson down there, he and I communicate a lot. He's in charge of the school resource officers. And the school resource officers are very much part of the family of our schools. I often tell people that a student is just as likely to go to our school resource officer and say, hey, where do I get my prom ticket, as they would any teacher or anybody else in the building. And the SRO will tell them, well, you go down to the bookstore. It's a very connected relationship with that. And they take our school safety very, very seriously, and it's their full-time job. So we're very blessed to have that relationship with the Fishers Police Department and with fire and the city. I could not be more blessed than to be in a school district where I work with these individuals. You're going to hear from people up and down the line here, and I tell you, I'm continually impressed by these people that I work with. They are incredible people, and they want your kids to be safe, and they're going to do everything they can for that to happen. One last thing I wanted to mention is that we also have a lot of different prevention that goes on by our partners in our schools. The Youth Assistance Program, the Fishers Youth Assistance Program, is a phenomenal program, and their whole existence is to intervene early into students and their families that are struggling. And our school counselors can contact them whenever they get information about a student or a family that needs some help, and they go and work with them shoulder to shoulder to help them. Another organization is YMI, the Youth Mentoring Initiative, and they provide mentors to our kids. And all these programs are to work on changing the trajectory of these kids and their families. And they're amazing people, they're community people that come in and partner with the schools to make that happen. The Peyton Rekoff Foundation for Youth Hope has provided us with resources in the area of mental health and suicide prevention. When we started with nothing, they came in and started finding a way, Mike Rekoff and his group. And finally, Parents in Partnership has been around for a long, long time. They were here in the 90s when I started, and they've always brought quality programs to try to help us work together as parents and as school people and as a community to do the best we can for our kids. So thank you for being here tonight, and I really appreciate you showing up. Our community always shows up, and I appreciate all that you do for our kids and our schools. So now I'm going to pass it over to Erica Buchanan Rivera, our Chief Equity and Inclusion Officer, and her and Brooke are going to talk a little bit about some of the things we do to help our students in preventing the kinds of things that happen that we're so worried about.
Thank you. I appreciate everyone being here this evening. I truly believe in the premise that it takes a village and a collective approach to support our students. So I'm very thankful that we have worked here tonight to truly address the needs of students. Again, I'm Dr. Erica Buchanan Rivera. I'm the Chief Equity and Inclusion Officer here within Hamilton Southeastern Schools. It is my job to examine the systems, the policies, as well as the pedagogical practices that may inadvertently breed inequities within our schools, and also to promote inclusive excellence across the district. It's important to think about safety in terms of the physical aspects. However, it's even more powerful and important to think about safety through an emotional standpoint and looking at identity and shifting the conversation importantly to a lens of equity. Equity being defined as the concept of providing students what is needed to succeed or survive. And what many of our students need within schools is to feel safe in terms of their identity. Therefore, it's important to have conversations around identity safety within schools and promoting environments that are free of bias, stereotypical views, prejudice, that lends to bullying, that lends to disparities that our students may face, inequities in terms of their social context. And therefore, as a student success team that I'm a part of, we're working hard in various aspects to promote equitable practices to meet and reach the needs of all students. I'm working in partnership with Brooke Lawson for mental health, Brandon Cloud for experiential learning, and of course, within my role with equity and inclusion. And we're working diligently to ensure that we are meeting individualized needs or having courageous conversations around what those needs may look like, and also putting strategic plans in place to address what students are dealing with and facing within their living experiences at school. You know, the best way to understand how to meet the needs is to build relationships and to engage in responsive practices. You know, responsive pedagogy is critical, you know, where we're getting to meet students where they're at, where we're understanding the below the line information that exists with students, knowing their stories, their background, who they are, and that we're able to find ways to profoundly connect students to the school environment. Establishing connection is key. Students need to be connected to school. They need to feel a high level of engagement and a strong sense of belonging within their educational environments. And that is critical. And it sounds simplistic, you know, for educators to engage in, but it's hard work, you know, when you start peeling the layers and trying to ascertain why students feel as if they are not connected and do not belong. And it is our role to make sure that we are amplifying student voice and that we're figuring out why inequities exist. So within my role, I've talked to many student groups throughout the district to figure out why students feel as if their identity may be safe or perhaps in some cases may not be. You know, and they're very open and honest about what is happening within their world, within their social context. And again, it's all about building relationships and establishing trust with our students, you know, so they're able to have a voice and articulate, you know, what they're seeing, because they're able to give us, as Dr. Beresford mentioned, a pulse of what is happening within their realm. You know, and if we're able to tap into that as educational leaders, you know, we can be proactive and preventative in figuring out, you know, what is occurring within the world of our students that may cause, you know, some discrepancies in terms of safety within our educational environments. We also have within our district an initiative called Guiding All Kids. It's a collective approach in thinking about, you know, how we're able to respond to the diverse needs of all students throughout the district. It encompasses our educational leaders, our counselors, business owners, parents throughout this community, where we're able to elevate the role of the counselor so they're truly able to meet the needs of students in intentional ways. You know, we've worked with some of the counselors who have been in the past engaged in more of the operational tasks, you know, such as scheduling and things of that nature. But we need counselors to truly connect with students, to have conversations, to process what they're going through in terms of their experiences, in terms of their trauma, in terms of their background. And so we're able to do that and elevate the role of the counselors through that profound work that's occurring throughout our city. And many of you have probably been a part of that or even have heard of the Guiding All Kids or the GAC initiative. You know, and importantly, making sure that, you know, we are informed as a district in terms of how to implement responsive pedagogy and trauma-informed practices, you know, where we're truly examining students from more of a relational-based aspect, and that we're trying to understand their needs in order to best address them in ways that, again, are proactive and preventative in this regard. And importantly, providing some learning experiences and professional development for our teachers. You know, our educators have many questions as far as how to navigate through, you know, controversies that exist within the classrooms when students are not able to connect with each other, when they're not able to even connect or engage with educational leaders within the environment. And how do you begin to have those hard conversations with students so we can establish a high level of connectivity where they are engaged and they're, you know, excited to be a part of their learning environment. And so these are things that we're working on throughout the district. You know, I'm in close partnership with Brooke Lawson again from the mental health aspect to make sure that, again, we are being equitable and meeting the needs of each individualized learner within our district.
Good evening. My name is Brooke Lawson. I'm the Mental Health and School Counseling Coordinator for Hamilton Southeastern Schools. And I just wanted to touch on three quick components that I think are important in regards to school safety and mental health. I think it's really important that we all as a community are taking care of our mental health, that us as parents are modeling self-care skills for our children, that we're helping them to reach out and get help when they need to. And so as a district, we are working in preventative ways. We are beginning to look at social emotional learning curriculums as a district, so that we'll be working to teach our children some of those social emotional skills. And I think parents play such a huge role in that as well. You play a role in teaching your kids how to be self-aware, how to make good decisions, how to manage their emotions, how to make responsible choices. And so I think that that's one really, really important aspect of mental health. I think it's really important that we are intervening early when our kids are struggling. I recently read a statistic that said that there's a lapse of 8 to 10 years between the time a child starts having symptoms of a mental health issue and the time that they actually start getting help. And so it's really important that when you start to see your child struggling, that you're reaching out for help. So that you know the warning signs and you know what to do. And lastly, our school district recently signed a contract with community mental health centers. We're working with Community Health Network. We have mental health therapists in all of our schools. So if you are worried about your child, you can always reach out to their school counselor and they can receive counseling right at school from a licensed clinical social worker, a licensed mental health counselor.
Thank you. I feel like I need to stand up. My name is Mike Johnson. I'm with the Fisher Police Department. I've been with the department for 25 years. And during that 25-year period, I've been associated with Hamilton Southeastern Schools as a DARE officer or as a school resource officer for 23 of those 25 years. So being involved in the school is certainly not something that is new to me. I oftentimes forget sort of who I work for. I'll be in a meeting with parents talking about school issues, and I'll be referring to we and us, as if I were a school employee. And then I'll transition to a city meeting where we and us means police department. So I sort of transition from both roles pretty easily. And the chief here allows that to happen, the superintendent, the mayor, everybody here. It's been a long, I think the mayor mentioned that, it's been a long time building this relationship. It's not something that just happened. One of the things I tell people recently, we've started doing these outreaches and talking about the school safety planning that we do. And when I tell people that my only job, 24 hours a day is school safety. That's all I do. I wake up in the morning and I think about the safety of your kids. I go to bed at night and I dream about it. It's all I do. It consumes me. So, and it's a calling. It's a great thing. So I want you to know that this is not something that is responsive, reactive. This is something we've been up to for a long time. There are some people here that I would like to introduce. They probably won't like it, but I'm going to ask them to stand up and wave. If any school resource officers that are here tonight, if you could just stand up and wave and draw attention to yourself that you don't want, that would be awesome. Yeah. They told me that that's a tactical advantage from the back, is what they said. And also here tonight, it's not just Fishers. The Fishers team is here for sure, but Carmel Police is also here. Their school resource officers, some of their folks. If other folks came, I invited the entire county. So Hamilton County Sheriff's Department, the SROs from Westfield, Noblesville. We work so closely together in our school safety efforts. Some of the best resources that I have, outside of my own team, is calling those folks. So we don't do this in a vacuum. at all. And I'm going to talk a little bit about what a school resource officer is. The definition is on the screen here. It's a federal definition from the Department of Justice, and it is actually a sworn law enforcement officer. It's not a part-time person. It's not a security guard. It is a full-time sworn law enforcement officer who has been carefully selected and specially trained to serve in the role of, it's a community policing role is really what it is, in the school. It takes a special kind of officer, in my opinion, to be able to interact effectively in a kindergarten classroom, in a high school classroom, in a junior high classroom, or on the streets dealing with police matters as well. So they have to be able to do many different things. I am probably not the best served person on the department to serve on the SWAT team, for example, right? There are people that are better served for that. And I can assure you there are members of the police department who would much rather have a van of criminals pulled over in a dark alley than teach in a kindergarten classroom. And so my strengths are their weaknesses and vice versa. So we work off of each other and we all have our calling. And the calling of a school resource officer is to meet what we refer to as the triad approach to school safety. We wear 3 hats in the classroom and in the building and in the district that we're in. And those 3 hats are that of a counselor. Now, obviously, I could say that it's an informal counselor. However, we do have one of our school resource officers that does have a master's degree in school counseling. So she really is a school counselor. But at the same time, we serve as that role model, that mentor, dealing with kids that are having crisis or in trauma or just need someone to talk to or a role model to spend time with. It's a big part of what we do. The other hat that we wear very frequently is that of a teacher. I've been in the classroom. I over my 23 years in the classroom or associated with the schools, I'm relatively certain I've got as much classroom time as some of our newer teachers do. And so it's a big piece of what we do. Building those relationships. I spent 15 years as a coach, a couple different sports, at the junior high level in a couple of our buildings. And so the relationships that we build as a coach, as a teacher, as a mentor, as a role model, those things, if we do it properly, everything rotates back to our job in safety and security and as a law enforcement officer, which is the base of our triad. But if we do our job properly, this triangle gets really tall and skinny because the most of what we do revolves around being the teacher and the counselor. Putting that hat on as a law enforcement officer is that what we do probably the least. And it's not our job to trail, nail, and jail kids or get stats or try to figure out how we can, introduce kids into the juvenile justice system. In fact, our job is to try to work with the school, the counselors, youth assistance program, Brooke and her team to try to figure out how we can avoid a child entering the juvenile justice system and provide other community services that may be more effective than an arrest. That's certainly our goal. We don't want to have an increase in contacts in the law enforcement role unless we absolutely have to. And then that is kind of where we circle back to the school safety piece as well. And the officers that I pointed out earlier work tirelessly, and they've already started this summer to begin some of the things they do in the summertime that I'll get to here in just a second. So if I could have the next slide, please. I want to talk a little bit about our training before I get into some of the more nuts and bolts of the school safety piece. There's a lot of topics that are on the screen, and I tell people that if you're going to be an effective school resource officer, you have got to be able to teach. You've got to be able to go into a classroom of young kids and interact and teach them something. But at the same time, you've got to be able to investigate inappropriate photos being shared through social media and what that might entail through our ICAC task force and some of the things that go along there. You've got to be able to investigate drug cases. You've got to be able to deal with some of the issues that are going on in terms of vaping and drinking and alcohol and all the health things that go along with prevention strategies. You've got to be able to understand the dynamics of the adolescent brain, right? I mean, I think this room has probably got experts on the adolescent brain. And policing the teenage brain is a course we all took a couple summers ago. I think it's very important for us to know as officers what exactly our kids are going through just developmentally in the brain and why the choices they make sometimes are questionable And so we understand that before we start putting charges on people. We also have to be able to identify vulnerabilities. The SIPTED concepts that I have listed here, crime prevention through environmental design. One of the things we've started already for this summer, our summertime building vulnerability assessments, where we go around to each of the buildings and just look for things that could be a vulnerability in safety. Anything that might be something that could be a danger, like a crack in pavement on the playground, to a shrub that's overgrown that makes it difficult to make a left-hand turn, to issues that may be more security related, door locks, etc. One of the things that we identified in our vulnerability assessment a number of years ago, and if you've been a parent in the district for any amount of time, you remember when this happened. You probably wondered why it was happening, but all the doors, right, leading into the offices, and now you got to go through all these doors, and you go through vestibules and everything. So many of our buildings, someone could walk in and just disappear, right, without any contact with an adult in the office. And we identified that as a vulnerability, and working with our partners in the school district, eventually a bond was granted, and we were able to put together some doors and a bigger security piece in the front of the buildings. And along came with that some of our background checks, that I think we'll get into later, and some of our visitor management. Big piece of what we do also is helping along with the things that go along with visitor management, the cameras in the buildings, the access to the buildings, the key fobs, the locks. We're constantly checking those things and making sure that we're on target. And boy, it's tough sometimes, especially when somebody may prop a door. We can't necessarily control that, but we have systems in place to make sure the best we can that doesn't happen. We could talk about the active shooter training and our threat response stuff. There are many times where my wife is in the room tonight and she'll wonder who I'm talking to on the phone at 2 o'clock in the morning. Normally it's Dr. Beresford, because we've got some sort of issue going on with a threat that's been detected on social media. Someone has reached out to us and texted tip, and we will not rest until we have put that threat to bed, literally, and make sure that we are in place to receive our kids as they come to school in the morning. It's very important to us that we understand exactly the steps that need to happen. And the chief's going to talk a little bit here in a minute about the response from the rest of the agency, because it is a team approach from our police department. But it's not uncommon for me, because my SROs are day shift school hour guys, that if I have a threat that comes up at 10 o'clock at night or 2 o'clock in the morning or whatever the case might be, I reach out to my comrades, the lieutenant on patrol or the supervisor on shift, and he sends his people to knock on people's doors at all hours of the night to make sure that we're tracking these things down. Sometimes our detectives get involved, and it's a very synergetic approach to making sure our kids are safe across agency lines. And then once we're sure, we can kind of make sure we can move forward with our day. It's not uncommon for me to make the decision that a student doesn't go to school the next day. I will have the parents say, because of this, we'd like you to bring your child to school, and the principal will let you know when to come for a meeting, and we'll talk through it and see, whatever the issues may be. So I have that kind of a relationship piece where I get to make some of those decisions on the fly. I let them know what I've done, and we move on. So it's a great relationship. I'll talk about active shooter in just a second. Trauma-informed practices are really big. I mentioned that a little bit with the teenage brain piece, because, if you are informed about the trauma that a child is undergoing or going through, you'll make better decisions as it relates to discipline or issues that you use or you select to prop that child up or wrap services around that child. And we try as a school resource unit to be as trauma-informed as we can, so that we can make choices about any involvement we have with that student. And don't misunderstand our role. We are not disciplinarians. We're not involved in school discipline. If there's something that happens at the school that's a violation of the student handbook, we may, put on our counseling or mentoring hat in those areas, but we do not enforce dress code. Ultimately, that's not a criminal act. It's not an act that's a violation of, the law, but it is a violation of the student handbook. And the student handbook is a big piece of the culture and a big piece of the order of the building. So we assist in those things, and certainly we have discussions about them, but it is not, we tread lightly when it comes to school discipline matters. I put human trafficking up here on the screen because not only do we have to have all those other areas of expertise, a couple of our officers attend the Hamilton County Sexual Assault Response Team meetings, where we have to be aware of signs for human trafficking. And 3 or 4 years ago, if you had told me that we needed to know that in Fishers, Indiana, I would have told you you're crazy. But the reality of it is I can think of 3 different cases off the top of my head where we've had this rear its ugly head with our citizens and our kids in Hamilton County and in Fishers. So it's something that we need to be aware of and identify so that we can recognize it when it happens. Oh, and by the way, we're going to have a Mudsock football game on Friday night with 13,000 people, so you better be pretty good at crowd control and special events planning as well. So SROs wear a lot of different hats during the course of the day or the school year, and we are absolutely thrilled to be part of such a great school district. School law, I'll mention quickly because it changes quite a bit. There's an educational reform going on right now. A lot of the case law that drives law enforcement, especially the major cases, are cases that were decided in the 60s and 70s. Most of the case law that drives the SRO world are cases from like 2005 and recent. So it's sort of a reform that's going on in the courts and in the educational world. And finally, I'll talk about Alice. Alice is our response to active shooter situations. And we rolled out Alice with our partners at Carmel Police. I think it was about 6 years ago. We went through the training together and became Alice Schools. Alice, it's very similar if you your places of employment. If you have run, hide, fight, just a quick show of hands, who's heard of run, hide, fight before, right? So I see a lot of hands up. Alice is very similar to that, but it's a few more pieces of the puzzle where we discuss a little bit more of the dynamics that kids are allowed to do. Before Alice, the protocols for lockdown were to turn off the lights, shut the door, and hide in the corner, and just wait for the good guys to get there. What we've learned post-Columbine, or what we've done as we've studied and looked at these events, all the way up to Sandy Hook, not Sandy Hook, I'm sorry, I think it was Virginia Tech, actually, where we looked at some of the responses and how people responded to these events. We found that giving educators and kids one option, hide under the desk, turn off the lights, and wait for the good guys to come, is not acceptable. We have to train our citizens, our students, our teachers, our staff, the civilian response to the active shooter, because the reality of it is if we have an attack on a school, there is going to be an estimation, 2 to 3 minutes are going to go by, where the people that are involved are going to have to fend for their life during that period of time. Now, there was a conscious decision, and I don't want anybody here to cringe, but there was a conscious decision a while back, because we were doing so much Alice training, that we wanted to go with more of a all hazards approach, because the reality is we need to be prepared to deal with tornadoes and fires and even earthquakes, right? Asthma attacks, broken bones, right? Medical issues in the classroom. These emergencies are more likely, custody disputes in the office. These things are all more likely to occur. So we started to train a little bit more with a global approach to all hazards. But Alice has never gone, it's never left, it's still here. It's something that I think, as this year has gone by, we've identified it as something we're going to revamp our approach and get this thing out. We've already started with some of our schools this semester to get this out in front of everybody's attention once again. And the steps are quite simple. The first step is the alert. This is how you learn about the event. Some of the examples are listed there on the screen. It could be, shots. It could be a PA announcement. It could be an email, text, screaming in the hallway. Whatever brought your attention to know that this event has begun is the alert. Next will be the lockdown. And Mr. Taylor here in just a minute is going to talk a little bit about the procedures and the language that we use when we go into lockdown. Lockdown in our district is going to be a word that is not used very often. In fact, it's only going to be used when we go to these procedures. And we'll get more into that in just a second. But lockdown is viable. It's a very viable piece of the puzzle. It means that you are safe where you are. You might as well stay there. But what we want you to do is prepare yourself. You may barricade doors. You may find a hiding place in the classroom, and even arm yourself with whatever you can find to distract or somehow throw an intruder off if they try to breach your door or enter your room. Right now, you're safe. You're in your safe place. But we want you to be prepared if the bad guy comes in to breach your safe place or take that away from you, that you are allowed to defend yourself. And so often before that, we didn't give anybody that option. And people responded how they were trained and just hid and wait for the good guys to come. And it's okay to fight for your life and defend yourself. And we'll get to the counter piece in a second. But preparing for that during lockdown is acceptable. I will point out to our friends in Noblesville, Alice was utilized the other day, and it was utilized to a T. I saw some photographs of some rooms that were barricaded pretty effectively. We know that there's some of the counter techniques were utilized. We know that people were hiding. We know that people were barricading and locking down. It absolutely worked to a T. After lockdown, these are not steps, by the way, you go in order with. These are steps that you can pick and choose. These are all tools in your toolbox. But when we get to inform, this is information sharing. So we would encourage having the ability, we did this a few years ago, where we improved the technology in the buildings so that all the teachers could pick up their phone in their classroom, dial a number, and hit the PA system. So we could report to the rest of the building where the threat was occurring. In a building like this, if a threat was in a hallway, if you're not familiar with this building, a hallway is about a quarter mile from here, right? So we would have a pretty good opportunity to evacuate this space and get out and go somewhere else. But if we're in a hallway, we may not want to evacuate into a hallway or out into the building because we could be in that zone where the threat is occurring. So lockdown may be a better option in that particular environment. It's all about empowering people to make decisions for their own survivability. But the informed piece is about sharing information, getting calls out to the police, receiving information in from first responders, and making sure that all information is moving in all the different directions all the time. Then we have the counter, and sometimes I think counter could probably stand for controversy because this is the one that is the hardest for people to understand. But if you are in a situation where you are hiding or you have for some reason confronted the bad guy, it's okay to fight for your life. It's okay to defend yourself. It's okay to do things that you wouldn't normally do. The bad guy may be armed, but it's okay for you to do things to lash out against that bad guy, throw things at him, distract him. The technique that we refer to as with adults in the room, or even high school kids and maybe even junior high kids, to swarm the bad guy. If 2 or 3 kids, I tell the kids in class, look, there's more of you than there are of me, right? That's a secret that we don't want the teachers to know. And so if a classroom would swarm me in front of the room in this uniform, armed and everything, if 2 or 3 kids got this arm, or 2 or 3 kids got this leg, or 2 or 3 kids over here, or 2 or 3 over here, all of a sudden I'm subdued. I'm humbled by the fact that Mr. Seaman in Noblesville did that. He actually countered the attacker. And those are things that I think are very difficult to do, but my goodness, what a story that is. For him to have done that. So it is possible to counter someone. Could you get hurt? Absolutely. Could it be very dangerous? Absolutely. But lives will be saved if we empower ourselves to make those decisions. Good news, right? Good news. If a door is barricaded, we know this. We know that a locked door, to my understanding, and I read as much as I can on different events like this, to my understanding, a locked classroom door has yet to be breached by an active shooter. Just the door being locked is enough. But we're going to go ahead and barricade and prepare ourselves anyway. And then finally, evacuate. If we can evacuate to the front, it wouldn't spell Alice anymore, so we put it at the end. So we really want you to have the ability to know. Sometimes kids don't necessarily understand that as much because it's okay to go. We are working on improving what we refer to as rally points around the buildings, and we're going to be identifying these places a little bit better and our SROs are going to suggest different rally points for each of our buildings during their audits this summer. But if I'm a student and I have left the building, I don't necessarily need my teacher to be there with me. I know I'm going to go to that rally point. It's probably going to be a little bit of a distance from the building, but we're going to go to that rally point. We'll send police to that rally point, and we'll make sure that we account for everybody. God forbid that ever happen. But we're constantly working on how we can improve our systems as it relates to all of these things. Again, one of the things I preempt my classes with parents and with teachers is this is not what you signed up for. I get it. This is sort of a law enforcement tactical approach here. But the reality is that if we do these things, we can actually improve our likelihood to survive. And this is the model that we have chosen here at Hamilton Southeastern. You're probably wondering, well, my child's in elementary school. I've got a kindergartner. My oldest is in college. My youngest is going into second grade. So my second grader, some of these things can be difficult. So the elementary classroom that we visit, we talk a lot about just following your teacher's instructions. We give advice to the teachers that when you drill these things, just play a game with your kids where you give them crazy instructions and make them follow the instructions. It could be anything, but we want to make sure that we're listening to our teachers and following the instructions. Boys and girls, if I break this window, we're going to jump and go, right? And then off we go. So those are the types of things that we want people to think about. We read a book to our elementary kids, and this is something that we've rolled out this school year. But it's a book that's distributed by the Alice Training Institute called I'm Not Scared, I'm Prepared. And we utilize this, it's a story about a wolf, some sheep, and a shepherd. And it's very age appropriate. We're not talking about guns and scary things to a classroom of elementary age kids. We do get into a little bit more intense conversations with 5th and 6th graders. We have a video that we've used over the years where the bad guy's using a Nerf gun. So we still reach that age-appropriate stuff. Junior high and high school, however, we kind of take the gloves off a little bit and talk a little bit more about these things. But at any rate, we try to be as age-appropriate as we can with such a horrible topic. But it is something that we think is very important to make sure all of us are prepared. And Dr. Beresford likes to remind me, these aren't just skills that we learn for school, right? These are skills that we might have to employ in a mall or in a movie theater or in a workplace someday. It's not limited to just schools. So I take my job very seriously. I'm absolutely honored to be part of this school district and our schools. I love our kids like they're my own, and I really appreciate everybody coming. Thank you.
My name is Mitch Thompson. I'm your chief of police. I've been with the police department for 28 years. And many of you I knew when you walked in. Some of you were my DARE students from back in the day. And I've been connected with HSE schools since 1991. And so the quality of what happens in our school buildings is very important to me. Always has been and will continue to be that way. And I often say to the community that the reason our community is so good is because we have good schools. As the schools go, we go. And it's important that we maintain that sense of safety within the buildings on a daily basis. And it certainly has been a growing task over those years. I wanted to give a little bit of history about where we've come from to where we're at. And in 1991, when I started here, we had officers that were hired off duty to work here, and primarily they were used to catch speeders on 126th Street as they left the school. Many of you may remember Lieutenant Fetters, whose daughter is now the principal at Landon Road Elementary. There are many web connections in our world. And in 1994, we started to add more resources to that, and we had what we began, I would say, that school resource officer feel to it. But in 2002, we obtained a grant, and we had our first full-time 2 school resource officers assigned to the district, one here and one that roamed. Today, they stand at HSE schools. We have 7 school resource officers. They serve 23,000 students and faculty every day that school is in session. That is larger than most towns and cities in the state of Indiana. It's an awesome responsibility. And, really, thank God we have people like Mike and his team that are in the back and some on the side that serve every day to ensure the safety of our schools. All that to say, though, there's more to learn. We have to continue to get better. We have to continue to evolve. And our response is a key component of that. Mike hit on the response in the schools. Alice, I think, is a very important response mechanism for us. But also, we have, at any given moment, at a minimum, 10 officers and on a daily basis, up to 45 officers working for the city of Fishers. So when there is a critical moment that occurs, whether it's in the schools or in the community, we bring resources to bear very quickly. But preparing for that is a big part of it. So while they're preparing in the schools, our officers are preparing on the street. And that preparedness didn't just start within the last couple of years, but it's evolved over time. And I won't talk much about tactics tonight because we don't like to give away what we do for obvious reasons, but I want to share a little bit with you. Back in the day, and prior to Littleton, the response would be if there was some type of incident in a building, the responding officer would show up and then we'd call out SWAT, and we'd surround the building, we'd wait for SWAT to go in and take care of business. That's not acceptable today. Today's expectation is that you go in. And that evolution didn't even occur that quickly. Our next training process was we would train and the first 4 officers would show up on the scene, and that would be a team, and then we trained a formation to go into the building and go after the threat. In today's environment, we have single officer deployment. As soon as one officer's on the scene, they will enter the building and go after the threat, because we know as soon as that threat is confronted, they're likely to end it one way or the other. We also train to where we have paramedics and firefighters that go in with us. Thanks to the leadership of Chief Aruza, we've been able to establish a cohesive training regimen in which we do active shooter training drills, police and fire and dispatch, to where everybody's on the same page and we can go in and take care of business, eliminate the threat. We can also remove the injured out of the building rather quickly rather than waiting for everything to calm down. That training and preparedness occurs on a regular basis. It occurs in many different ways. Sometimes it's just a roll call conversation. Sometimes it's a tabletop exercise. And annually, it is done on a agency-wide basis for us. And then this year, before all this had occurred last Friday, there's a county-wide initiative where every police agency and every fire department in this county is being brought together to train in active shooter drills so that we can all be on the same sheet of music. And that also includes our dispatch resources, which I can't stress enough is really important. And it just so happened that last week, we had one of our representatives training Hampton County Communications on procedures that have been updated. And then lo and behold, that event happened Friday, and those dispatchers are so thankful to have the newest techniques that need to be administered by them. So that training is ongoing so that our response continue to be effective. And sadly, though, we know that what we do today will not be what we do 5 years from now, that we have to continue to progress and up our game in that response arena. I thank you for everybody being here. Lieutenant Johnson and I were talking before we sat down, and we've done many, many parent nights over the years. This is the largest audience that we've ever had, and we're grateful for the support of the community, the concern of the community, and the willingness of the community to help us get better. With that, I'll turn it over to Mr. Taylor.
Good evening. I'm Ryan Taylor. I'm a building administrator here in the district, and I also assist as needed in developing plans and implementation for our safety. It is interesting. We are very fortunate, I will tell you, to live in Indiana, to have a commitment from the state in regards to safety. We are a leader, if you don't know that, in the nation. We had a recent safety conference just a few weeks ago, and there were representatives of over 20 different states present to our training to see how we do things and to try to learn. And certainly we do not know it all. I mean, that's the thing. I mean, safety is ongoing, as was mentioned. We are never done. Your commitment here tonight, I mean, the response that we'll have as a result of this meeting, as things that have happened recently unfold and as we learn more, our steps, our procedures, protocols may change. And so that is one of the things, you know, we're very fortunate in Indiana to be a part of. Our legislation, and it's great to see representatives here tonight as well. Recently, they have passed legislation also, again, based on situations around the nation to reflect best practice. And so we're very appreciative of them. And if you don't know, the state does require in code that plans be reviewed, modified accordingly every year. Every school in the state of Indiana has to submit those plans to the state. They outline the different components, that those plans have to have in them. We have to work with our law enforcement and our fire folks as well to ensure not just responses, maps, and all the things that we go into a response. All of those have to be included. And then each district, of course, we're going to review those as a team to ensure the schools have met compliance. And then comes the fun part of implementation and practice. And I'm sure you'll have questions here shortly about what does that practice look like. But I will tell you, our brothers and sisters in Noblesville, if it wasn't for the practice that they have been doing with the unarmed response to an active shooter, it would have been worse. They mitigated it because of the practice, and for that we're very thankful for that. In our schools as well, we practice. The state requires us to practice. They specify a minimum number of man-made drills that we have to do. They will specify the tornado drills, the fire drills, and obviously with what we have to do with fire, that's why we haven't had a fatality in years due to fire. So it's all about practicing, and we will continue to do that. We'll respond to whatever is happening in society. And you know, the great thing is I'm sitting up here looking out is we're not alone, and that gives me a lot of comfort that we all have a shared vision of what safety is supposed to be, and we're going to come together, and that's amazing. I'm going to turn this back over. I know we have a lot of questions that have been submitted, so I'm going to give this back to Dr. Baxter.
Well, thank you all for your questions and taking time to listen to our panel of experts. It's clearly have a real passion about the safety of our children in our school system. We have a number of questions here, and I'm going to roll these out to Dr. Borf as well as the panel. First question off the bat, how can I learn more about the mental health counselors and using this service? Brooke, can you share a little bit about if a parent is concerned about either their own child or maybe another child that might be having some troubles, where are those resources?
Sure. So you can reach out to your child's school counselor. Every school in our district has a mental health therapist on staff at the school. Most of our schools have counselors full-time. Some of them are split between two schools. So if you have a concern, I would encourage you to reach out to your child's school counselor, to talk to them, to share those concerns, because like I said earlier, mental illness is treatable, and mental health issues early intervention is key. And so if you have a concern, it's important that you reach out and share those concerns and get some help.
And along this line,
Excuse me, Scott.
Yep.
Since there's no school counselors right now, you call the central office, and this lady right here will answer the phone.
Along these lines, when we identify a child that is maybe seems to be having some difficulties, the question is, what will you do with students who have shown to be a threat to the school environment, and ultimately their behavior isn't changing? There isn't the concern is ongoing with that threat, or that child, I should say. So whether Mike, either one of you guys want to tackle, when we have identified a child that may very well be a threat or having threatening behavior, how do we follow that through?
So it's not uncommon for us to be looped in on a student who has exhibited some sort of, maybe it's self-harm or threat to harm others, or maybe exhibiting something that would give us an indication that there may be a deeper concern here about safety. I will tell you that it is not a common occurrence. Many times if a student is dealing with an issue where they're becoming outwardly vocal about things, it's typically because of maybe some self-harm issues or something in that regard. If a student rises to the level of where we believe there may be an outside sort of threat going on, we share that information through our MOU, Memorandum of Understanding, that we have between the city and the schools. We share the information that we receive. If we receive that information, then our role as a school resource officer would make the school aware of that information. Sometimes it may involve a case report. Sometimes it might involve a contact with Department of Child Services. Other times it may be reaching out to a school counselor or to Brooke and her team And then we begin the communication process where we identify this student and then begin to make sure that the services that we have in our community, and they're plentiful. It could be school counselors, youth assistance program, maybe professional counselors outside the school setting. Regardless, we will kind of turn that child over to the school to make sure that those services are provided. And then if another step beyond that is needed, it's not uncommon for us to take a student or a young person down to Community North for an emergency evaluation, which is something we do. And we may also even consult with parents in those situations where we allow the parents to take them in and sign them on their own. But sometimes we have to take that on our own because we're not certain that will happen. So I'll let Dr. Beresford talk about the school pieces of the puzzle, but there are certainly a lot of steps that we take when we are made aware of kids that are displaying tendencies to be at risk.
And from the school side, once law enforcement has done their threat assessment and done their business, a lot of times it comes to us. We have what I would describe as a continuum of service. So basically it's to work with the student and what they need. So if the student is displaying behaviors that are just not safe to be in a classroom, we'll move them to a more restricted environment. And that continuum can be everything from giving some special attention at home, at school, or a mentor, or some kind of a support system in the school to help them along. And the other end of the continuum would be placement, in a special facility and to work on pretty severe behaviors and that sort of thing. But we have layers and layers and layers. As you've heard tonight, there's layers and layers and layers of school safety. And there's some layers that we're not going to talk to you about tonight because those are very private, confidential, but they're out there. But in working with kids, it really is an individual piece, one kid at a time situation. And we're going to work with the kid to turn that behavior and turn that trajectory of that kid with all the resources that we have, whether that's anything from counseling to even a residential setting if that has to happen.
Dr. Beresford,
continuum.
Real quick question to follow up on that. How often are we conducting active shooter training with our kids?
Yeah. State law requires once a semester, and then a lot of times, anytime there's a violent act, we review that violent act, whether it's in Indiana or across the nation or even out of the country. And oftentimes we'll do reviews whenever something happens because it's like Friday, when you get hit in the mouth with it, you want to review your practice, see what you can learn, and see if we need to change something.
And then this one I would open up to Dr. Bohr for school leadership or even the police department. I think it's for everyone to weigh in. Question is about considering requiring clear backpacks as a policy within our school system. Have we thought about that, considered it, and whether that's something we would consider?
We certainly would consider that. We have not had a serious policy discussion on that, but preparations for the entry of students into school would suggest that maybe we ought to be looking at that, and we are open to those considerations. To that same issue, there are several suggestions made by parents throughout the district that are practical questions. And one of the questions that came up would be, would we consider convening a group of parents to be a part of a bigger picture? But this would be like a parent advisory group dedicated only to school safety. And the answer to that is absolutely yes. We would appreciate a committee dedicated to that. I meet regularly with a group of parents who represent the PTOs, but our agenda is much broader than just school safety. We would welcome parent participation on that, and from that council, we would probably find there would be more suggestions than the clear backpacks. Interestingly, we had a conversation with a student yesterday about the backpacks, and with technology eliminating some of the need for heavy packages of books and materials, there may come a time when there is no need for backpacks at all. So we aren't there yet, but the issue of clear backpacks is certainly worth discussing.
If I could interrupt real quick, Dr. Beresford mentioned something that I wanted to elaborate on. He mentioned a threat assessment, and I didn't really elaborate much on that. I wanted to make sure that didn't go unnoticed, but a threat assessment would be if we recognize one of the students that is exhibiting, maybe there's this post online with what appears to be guns, or there's violent tendencies are shown. One of the things our SROs will do, and if it's late in the night, and even our road guys have done this for me as well, where we actually speak to the parents about the issue, and we will actually get consent from the parents to search the child's room. We'll talk about access to guns. We'll make sure there aren't guns, knives, or weapons being hidden anywhere in the home, and have those conversations to make sure that we don't actually have access to those things. So that threat assessment is sort of that process where we identify what the threat is and then assess the reality of the threat. So I just wanted to touch on that.
There's a number of questions here regarding hardening of the target, so to speak. So securing our buildings, I see a number of comments about metal detectors. And I know this is a conversation that is ongoing. We've had this discussion, but both from law enforcement and from the school perspective, you want to touch a little bit on just the dialogue around metal detectors as we sit here today.
There has been a lot of discussion about metal detectors, and there are issues that we would have to deal with if we went with metal detectors. One of the questions would be finance. How do you finance that kind of project, especially with the number of doors that we have in our buildings? Processing 3,300 students in the course of 15 to 20 minutes is a logistical issue. So it would require that we probably have more than one door at both high schools and junior highs with metal detectors. With the metal detectors, it would require that we have someone staffing that metal detector. So we have also a labor cost. And those are issues that we must grapple with if we're going to look at that as a viable alternative to what we do right now. I don't know what the research would suggest on the effectiveness of metal detectors. We've seen some research that would suggest that there are ways that students work around those metal detectors. And I'm not so sure that technology hasn't improved to the point that that wouldn't be an issue anymore. But we are having a conversation. I turn it over to the police department to talk about metal detectors and their estimation.
My understanding, what I've looked at it with metal detectors, is in order for a metal detector to be effective, the facility that has the metal detectors needs to have a secure perimeter. So if you consider an airport, for example, there's really only one way in, one way out. The courthouse, for example, one way in, one way out. And they're not dealing with the mass numbers of folks going through those entryways that we would be during such a short period of time. So there are some logistical issues. I wouldn't be opposed to, someone talking to me about how we can overcome those logistical issues. And I'm not even talking about from a cost perspective, but just imagine if you had one airplane that held 3,500 people, and all 3,500 people went to the airport 15 minutes before the flight was scheduled to depart. What TSA would look like during that 15 minutes, everybody would miss the flight. So, coming to school 2 hours early, I don't know that's really an option. So there are logistical things that are legitimate that we would really need to talk about, multiple entrances, et cetera. On the surface, I would really be, I hesitate to use the word pose, but I would really need someone to talk to me about, I want to give everyone the ideas that we come up with. I want to make sure we give everything time and talk about it, but I want it to be something that works. And if another student can go to a back part of the building and let another student in a side door, that's going to defeat the metal detector every time. So we would just have to kind of overcome those issues. And right now, I'm not quite there with the metal detectors.
So I think across the board, what you will hear from the panel tonight and the conversations that are ongoing is a true commitment to finding, a true commitment to finding substantive answers to your questions and not symbolic gestures. So when we say we're not sure yet, it is a genuine desire to make sure that what we do matters in the safety of our children's lives. One of the questions, Chief Thompson, is in general, what are the most common threats that the law enforcement department deals with around our children today, both in the schools and just in the community in general?
Well, I think the biggest challenge that kids deal with from a threat perspective is the social media aspect of their world. You know, so frequently we hear adults will say today, oh, kids today, you know, when I was a kid this, when I was a kid that. And really, kids today live in a world that we can't imagine. In fact, we try to tune out and don't want any part of. We choose not to be involved in certain social media aspects and so forth. These kids live with it day in, day out, 24/7, and trying to obtain some sort of social acceptance. And because of that, it leads to behavior and threats and bullying and the mental health side of things that I think leads to what is the biggest issue with juveniles. You know, we all seek out three things: affection, belonging, and recognition. When we were young, before social media, we were able to seek that out oftentimes just through normal relationships. Now these relationships are formed with people that they've never actually met. And those fallouts occur with people they've never actually met, and that self-esteem issue that comes with it. So those are the most common threats that we deal with because it affects how that kid responds. And I want to backtrack a little bit too, if I can. You know, in terms of the metal detectors thing, I'm very concerned about how it's defeated on a regular basis in a building like this, because we think of it in terms of when they're going to school. But what about after school? All their extracurriculars. Virtually all of our buildings are accessed 7 days a week for about 15, 16 hours a day, whether it's for sports or band or extracurricular things that are going on beyond the school day. And I can't imagine metal detectors being employed every time that building is being used, but that's what it would take to have a little bit of security involved with it. So that logistics of metal detectors needs to be worked out. The other thing I want to bring up too, in terms of a response from an agency, I want to make sure that everybody understands when an event happens in our community, you get not just the resources of the Fishers Police Department, but you get the resources of every agency in the county and really every agency in the region. Even here tonight, we have our friends from Boone County that are here. We have friends from all the agencies within the county that are here. Even last Friday, when that incident happened, we had about 45 Fishers police officers that responded within 30 minutes to that scene to provide the assistance needed. It wasn't responding and standing around wondering what to do, but it was responding and providing resources. And it was all the agencies in the county doing that. And that's why it's critical during that preparation that we all plan together, prepare together, train together so that we respond together as a critical piece of our success.
So switching from a response to a prevention mode, Brooke, there's a question about it's you guys. Brooke, what are we doing in terms of, there's a question about adding mental health professionals or counselors in our school system. Can you just touch on where we've been in the last few years and where we are today in terms of that?
Sure. So in 2016, when I started in the district, we had a partnership with a community mental health center, and we had 2 mental health therapists in the district, and they were serving around 50 students. We started this past school year in August with 13 mental health therapists in the district. We ended the school year and they're serving almost 600 students in the district. So we've expanded our mental health providers substantially in the last couple of years.
Great. Mike Beresford, this is a question for you or Dr. Borf. When an event or something happens at a specific school, let's say it's Fisher Junior High, why is it that we only communicate directly to that school and not the other schools? That's the question from the individual.
That's a great question, and really it's on and I hate to keep saying a case-by-case basis, but when we're dealing with information and dealing with a threat or incident, we try to figure out what is the appropriate audience that needs to hear that. And sometimes you notice we do communicate with just the school because it's specific to that school, and that school knows what's going on in that school community. It's really the only ones involved. Other times we'll get some kind of a threat and we feel like it's going to be a wider audience, and we'll send it out to the whole district. So it just comes down to what the facts of the case are and what we determine to be appropriate to communicate.
Speaking of social media, there are some useful tools for it. What about safety and security for portable classrooms?
We're concerned about portables too. Portable classrooms, for those of you who don't know, it's kind of like a double wide trailer, but I like to call them academic suites. Actually, the teachers and the students don't really mind it because they can control the heat and the air conditioning like any other room in the building. But it does cause pause for teachers and for students and parents a lot of the time. As Brian kind of explained a little bit, and Mike, one of the key components to school safety is giving the classroom teacher and the students the complete responsibility and power to do what they need to do. And so, for instance, in an elementary setting, if there's portables in the back, I think every attack on an elementary school has come through the front door. And as soon as that alert goes out, actually a portable could be an advantage because you can get right out of the portable and run out to the neighborhoods and get far, far away. Years ago, we'd have the portables sitting out on the lawn, and we stopped that practice years ago and put fences around it to cause it to build a deterrent around that area, and then work with the interior doors. When we go through our systematic messaging where we tighten our security, like on a daily basis, we have a perimeter secured with a single entrance into the building. You guys all know that, you deal with it every time you come to school. But then sometimes we'll go to a level where we'll just keep kids inside. That means there may be a threat outside in the community, but not at the school. Then we have a shelter in place where we'll keep kids in the classroom, hallways cleared, and kind of hunker down. And we'll bring everybody in from the outside and the portables and get everybody into the main building. And then, of course, we have the lockdown, which is when there's an active shooter assailant in the building. But in all those settings, there's kind of pluses and minuses, but portables are not as secure as a block building. The good news is we're going to open up our 22nd elementary school in a year, and that is going to take care of all the portables in the district, we believe, so we'll have everybody inside.
The next question, Dr. Borf, probably lead with you, and then law enforcement chime in. What is your position on arming well-trained teachers if legislation permits?
We do have well-trained, armed personnel in our buildings every day, and that would be our SROs. We are concerned that we would have the level of preparation necessary under stressful situations for our staff to be successful. It's very difficult, even for our armed professionals, to provide that accuracy under stressful circumstances, but they're trained, and they are trained for many hours to do just that. We're very concerned that if we even have that opportunity, that we would find the staff properly equipped to do with skills to carry out that kind of responsibility.
I want to add to arming teachers, and I'm going to put a couple teachers on the spot because I just made eye contact with them. Because it comes into play with arming teachers and with portables. I want our teachers to be armed with knowledge. And these two teachers, Mrs. Keyfaber and Mrs. Hudson down here, I got invited to their classroom towards the end of the school year because on the day of the walkouts that were happening nationally, they'd had the conversation with their classroom in the portable about, you can send letters to legislators, we could walk out, or, we could have conversations about true change. And their classrooms came up with ideas to make portables safer and more effective in some of the run, hide, fight, Alice protocols, to the point where they began to reach out to leadership in the state of Indiana, which culminated in a day where I went out to listen to this presentation, and I was shocked at the fact that these fifth grade students had drawn in the Indiana Department of Homeland Security's executive director, his staff, the Homeland Security attorney, the chief fire marshal in Indiana, the chief building commissioner in Indiana. I mean, it was a who's who of building, construction, and safety, and they were all there to listen to fifth graders. And it just very resonated with me that, you know what, if we ask our kids these questions, they might actually have the answers. And I traveled down to the State House with those kids about a week later, where they got a tour of Homeland Security. It was wonderful to see these two teachers take the executive director for Homeland Security through a brainstorming exercise that day. It was fabulous. And these kids really, through arming, the teachers being armed with that kind of energy with school safety, they're going to make some true change, and I couldn't be prouder of these two teachers.
Chief Thompson, question in some regards to gun control. The question is, the person is not a gun owner themselves, but they ask, what can we do to ensure that people who do have guns are taking the appropriate steps to ensure that they're secured when not in use?
Well, a friend of mine said the other day that when a child takes an action with a gun that they obtained from their parents, they should charge the parent with the same crime. And then maybe finally people will start to secure their weapons. And I agree. It is amazing. I can't tell you statistically, but I can tell you rhetorically, it is amazing to me the number of folks in our own community who keep guns in their cars, and their cars are unlocked and the gun is unsecured in their vehicle, and we take stolen gun reports from people from their cars, and the common response is, well, this is Fishers. We're 90,000 people. We border a major metropolitan city. You are crazy. Lock your stuff. And, you know, we do the hide it, lock it, keep it campaign. We try to educate not just about guns, but about anything you value. Please secure it. Most importantly, though, in this situation here, when we talk about how to secure weapons, it's education, education, education. No matter what side of the argument you're on gun control, there are going to be guns in our society, and we have to educate folks and get them to secure those weapons and not take it for granted that my kid is trained, he won't touch that gun, or, you know, those types of things. I just believe in, you have to have trigger locks, you got to keep them secured within the environment that they're in if you want to have them.
Dr. Borf, a question about finances. As we talk about some of these implementations do have financial ramifications. In terms of being aggressive about federal or state grants that may be available for our school system to apply to get some resources to be able to implement some of the things we talk about tonight, are there people assigned within the school system to be actively pursuing those grants?
We do have a special projects coordinator who keeps her eyes open for grants that would secure dollars for security and safety. But I would also say that we have one of the finest chief financial officers in the state, and we have had many conversations with him about this subject. And I know that we have some members of our General Assembly out there, and I don't want to put any of them on the spot, but if the General Assembly is very serious about this conversation, I hope that they listen to people who are interested in a statewide referendum dedicated to school safety. In one of the conversations raised in the comments made to me just since last Friday, parents are asking if there would be a time when we have that kind of conversation. And statewide, that might be a logical conversation with our legislators.
I could not agree more about Mike Reuter. I once saw him squeeze a quarter out of a nickel. So,
Mayor, if I could just
Yes.
add real quick, in the term of finance, because the reaction typically after something like this, and it happens after every single incident throughout the country, and you will see the community justifiably so reacting accordingly. And that first response is some product type of response. And, you know, I just want to make sure we have done everything we can to exhaust the things that don't cost a penny. Your creativity, I've heard in our last meeting we had with the public, we were having parents just, the things that don't cost anything, such as, can we have officers, if they're doing reports, sit in an elementary parking lot for additional visibility? I've heard of schools using students that are, in particular, Fishers High School has students that need jobs, part of the Exceptional Learners Program. Well, they'll take a clipboard. And it's very expensive, by the way, to put monitoring systems on every external door that can tell you if it's open or not. But a free thing you can do is have a student and a buddy go around the clipboard, and then the students are taking ownership of that facility. They're owning the space, and they are going through and they're checking to make sure doors are locked and just pushing against them, seeing if there's any stones and things like that. That doesn't cost a cent. And, you know, so the challenge here is continuing working within every single building to ensure we have exhausted the things that don't cost a cent. The training, being able to bump that up and increase this frequency on those types of things. It could be just questioning from the front desk to how a custodian meets, you know, the milkman at the back dock and how we monitor those things. All of these things are free. And those things, I just want to make sure, I guess as an administrator and representative in your community, that we are exhausting every single thing before we turn to products. Because we have great people and we've got great staff members that absolutely love kids. And I just want to make sure we know that.
We actually, those students, he actually deputized them and gave them a little plastic badge to wear when they check the doors, and they come running back to him with a report after they found a door prop or something like that. And they really take their job seriously. It's pretty awesome.
I just want to piggyback too off of the things that are free. Building the capacity to have profound relationships with students is also another area where we need to focus on as educational leaders, and being very intentional about reading the room and seeing the needs that exist within our educational environments. We may have students who have overt behaviors, you know, however, there are many students who are under the radar, you know, and we need to figure out ways to engage them, ways to find, you know, ways to connect them into our learning environments. And that's powerful work. It's hard work. You know, I've met with quite a few student groups throughout the district, you know, through, you know, our elementary sites, our intermediate, our high schools, you know, working with student councils, with diversity clubs, and they'll be very transparent in telling you what inequities they're facing and have conversations about action plans or ways to have, you know, courageous conversations in their building to rectify what they're seeing in terms of their living experiences. I met with a group the other day who had talked about what it meant to be popular and what it meant to be on the inskirts of things and what it meant to be on the outside of a group, and how they wanted to reframe what popularity meant within their building and take that as a charge for next year. So again, we can start these courageous conversations with our students so they can have a proactive way and voice to be a part of these conversations pertaining to school safety and identity safety, essentially.
Erica, that's a great segue. Brooke, going back to from the mental health perspective, one of the things that we're learning, unfortunately, because we've had a number of active shooter scenarios, that there's a profile that comes with some of these folks. And there's this new talk about trauma. So kids that have experienced trauma, kids that are living with trauma. The question is, how does a parent identify a kid that might be suffering with some issues from trauma, and how do they approach a child that may not be their own regarding that issue?
Well, I think you need to watch for changes in the child's behavior, change in their personality, change in their sleep patterns, changes in their eating patterns. And when you notice those concerns, then I think you need to reach out and look for help. So whether that's talking to that child's parent and sharing your concerns, or letting the school know that you've noticed this and share those concerns, and then we can check in on those students and give them the help that they might need.
I want to, we're getting close to the end. I appreciate all your patience, but we want to make sure we answer everyone's questions here tonight. Elementary schools, we've talked a lot about high schools. We naturally kind of gravitate towards that because junior highs and high schools are where we're seeing some of these activities. But can anyone here jump in on talking about the security measures and protocols we put in place for elementary schools?
We absolutely, I recognize that the differences between our buildings and the grade levels is significant when we talk about safety and the safety issues. So the first thing, and Christy Thomas I know is here, she's a principal at Geist Elementary, and she's a member of our safety team, primarily because she's very good at what she does and a very staunch advocate for school safety. But she also is that voice of elementary schools when we're having our conversations about school safety issues, to make sure we don't miss something, make sure we don't try to apply something in our adult brains where, the second graders may struggle with that. So she is that check and balance to make sure that we are covering everything from K through 12. So that piece is in play always. And then from boots on the ground sort of responses to the buildings themselves, not a whole lot of difference in terms of the buildings themselves. They have the same vestibules, the same security, the same visitor management, et cetera. We've upgraded the cameras and so on. So from that perspective, very similar. Now, when you start to get into the classroom, it is very different. So from our perspective as the police department, and we are going to be working in the future to have more opportunities to visit our elementary schools as classroom presenters. Right now, our big push has been fourth grade social media classes, where we come in and talk to fourth graders about their activities online, and to start to build the relationships. I'm a big relationship person, and I think it's important that we start those relationships as young as possible. So from that perspective, we're trying to get into those buildings to have age-appropriate conversations about safety in every capacity, beginning at the elementary schools. I'm hopeful in the not too distant future we'll roll out some things in the younger grades. The ALICE thing that we're starting to do is going to be every year. So that's going to hit kindergarten through fourth grade in our elementary buildings as well. So making sure the presence is there. The new thing we're going to roll out in the fall, once we kind of get the school year under control, is our High Five Fridays, that we're going to have officers from all the divisions of the police department come in and just high five kids as they're getting off the bus to come in, to let them know that we got your back at school from the police department's perspective. So we try to get our arms around our elementary kiddos as best we can to make sure that those safety things they don't look and feel like safety to them. It's just, officer-friendly stuff, but it's always on our mind.
I think one of the frustrations that I have dealt with over this past school year with some of our parents is that of the safety checks, the safety requirements for visitors who come in. They need to go through a background check before we allow them in to spend time with their grandchildren or their children. And it's very frustrating for those who don't pass the scrutiny that we have for our background checks, and there have been those. And I have dealt with some very angry people because they have a battery charge that comes through with their background checks, and it may have happened a couple of years ago, or they may suggest it was a bogus accusation that actually came through in a plea bargain. That's immaterial to us. We do not want people who can't pass their background checks to be sitting in our cafeterias or in our offices with students. And when I take it back with some of these people. I've asked, would you want someone with that same kind of background check sitting with your child in that same cafeteria? Sometimes it helps and sometimes it doesn't, but that is a frustration. As the tests become more effective, they become more rigorous and sometimes more frustrating to people who find themselves unable to pass those. But we are pretty resolute that it must be a clean check before we allow them in. So that's one of the issues. Dr. Beresford, go ahead.
Yeah, after Sandy Hook, really school safety took a very sharp focus on elementary school because up until then we've not had a lot of direct attacks on an elementary environment. That's the time when we did get a bond go through and we changed our entryways and made what we call a secure vestibule. And the whole idea of that is to delay any kind of attack on an elementary school. We were aiming for about 4 to 8 minutes of delay to give our officers time to get there, and I think our response is probably going to be under 2 minutes. So that was a big piece of that. So that's why you go through those entryways and you have to wait and then be buzzed in. We changed our protocol some so that the people in the office can get a real good visual of who's standing in the doorway. Research showed that people who are going to do something bad have a mannerism, and that most people pick up on those mannerisms. So we got rid of the tiny little cameras that you can put your thumb over and made a different kind of entryway. We put laminated glass around the inside of that so that if it was shot, it could not shatter and an entry couldn't be made very quickly. We did a lot of things like that. We're always in this balance because we don't want to scare children, but we want them to be prepared and we want them to be safe. And in the elementary world, we spend a lot of times just working on skills, evacuating out of the building, quickly evacuating back into the building. We call that a reverse evacuation. Paying very close attention to what your teacher wants you to do. Just anything that you can think of about skill-wise, about running and yelling and running instead of a straight line, running crooked, and anything like that where they learn skills, but are not necessarily understand why they're doing that. But the most important thing for elementary kids is to do what their teacher tells them, and whether that's run or hide or pile up stuff in front of the door. Those are things that we try to do developmentally because we don't want to scare our kids. We don't want our schools to be prisons, but we want them to be as safe as possible.
I think to that point, as we segue into one of our final questions, Dr. Borf, Mike, leadership from the schools, as we know, we're moving and evolving our school system in terms of the buildings. They're more of an open concept. As we talk about safety procedures in the case of an instance, one of the questions is, how are kids supposed to barricade if they're in an open classroom concept?
We may tag team on this, Mike. We don't have any open classroom concepts in the schools, but we do have very visible concepts, very visible classrooms now, especially in some of our renovations. And there are lines of sight, and then there are lines that deny sight, even in those classrooms. And so our teachers will be prepared to deal with that. We also have, within those classrooms, easy ways to block the vision, even on those windows. As Dr. Beresford mentioned a second ago, we have laminated glass also that is being installed in many of those classrooms. There are also, in those classrooms, areas that have been set aside for group meetings, small group meetings, into which you could find a place outside the line of vision from anyone who would be strolling by the halls. Mike, you have any other ideas on that?
Not really. I mean, there's a lot of glass in our CCAs, and that is a safety concern. We're always in also a balance between having a really cool educational environment, and then also, I mean, it'd be super safe to put block walls and close our people with what I call prison windows, but it's not a real inspiring environment. So it's always a balance between that. We're a little more comfortable with that at the high school level because high school kids are going to run and they can act very independently and they're going to be in a different setting. With the elementary construction, where you try to do more things with line of sight and having blinds and being able to have hard structures around the glass and different structures that they can be more safe. All of our new elementary construction after Sandy Hook, they actually came out with architectural standards for school safety. And our architects that work on that, like our new elementary school, follow those standards in order to build as safe schools as possible.
And I think sometimes the glass gets a bad rap a little bit because the glass that we're utilizing in these CCA rooms, for example, are going to be more of a ballistic protection than even drywall. And I think it does take away, sometimes the ability to hide. But I've gone into some of those classrooms and talk kids through it. Those CCAs are built in such a way that it's if you can imagine, if you're familiar with it, as a big open space, much like a cafeteria, a huge open space. The access points into the CCA can actually lock down. You can treat the entire wing of the building as one classroom. And so from there, you can begin your plans to, utilize the ALICE protocols if necessary. So I've gone through and talked to kids about this. If you want to Google or YouTube breaking laminated glass, you'll see how difficult it could be.
So I hope tonight you see that we tried to approach this discussion in the fullest measure of humility and transparency about working towards a safer environment for our students, our children. I'd ask tonight as we close out, and I'd like Dr. Borf to close out the meeting, but there is one last question, and I think it's an appropriate one. What is the one thing that parents can do to help make our children, our teachers, our school resource officers safer as they leave here tonight? What is the one takeaway that we all have our jobs to do, but they also do? So if each one of you could leave them with one thing that they can go out and do, and then we'll have Dr. Borf close us out, that would be wonderful.
I just ask that you continue to be our teammate in this. And I think one parental suggestion I would be is trust your kids, but verify, have them earn that trust, find ways to get into that social media, give them reasons to trust you, check the rooms, check the cars that you entrust them to drive to school. All these kind of measures where it just reassures you as a parent that your student, your kid is doing the right thing. So trust but verify.
And for me, it's relationships with your kids, relationships with your kids' friends' parents, relationships with teachers, with the schools. I mean, if you think about it, there's 21,000 students in the school district. So in theory, we could have had 21,000 involved parents here tonight. This is a small sample of our school district. You folks are involved, but build relationships with those that aren't here tonight. And don't be dismissive of any concern that you have. If you have a concern, bring it to our attention.
We always talk about the mental health stigma, and I've been in this community since 1991, and I'm the proud imperfect father of 3 imperfect children, and I'm married to an imperfect mom and wife. And I think one stigma we have in our community is that when we struggle as parents with our kids, we don't want to tell anybody because we don't want to reach out for help because we don't want people to think we're not a good parent. And we got to get over that. And we have to reach out to each other, and we have to work together for our kids. And in that way, we can really support one another and get our kids the help they need when they need it. So my one bit of advice is if you have a concern, let's talk about it.
Dr. Beresford stole mine. So I'm going to think quickly on my feet. I do want to reiterate, just don't be ashamed to reach out for help for you or for your child, and to remember to be a model for your kids. As a parent, you're modeling how to deal with your emotions, how to get along with other people, how to resolve conflicts. And so I just want to remind you that to be a good model. And so if you're struggling to get that help.
I always go back to the same statement as far as relationships. It's so important to make sure that we are able to connect with students in profound ways. However, I also think it's critical for parents throughout the room to engage in some hard conversations and courageous conversations with your children in terms of what do inequities perhaps look like and feel like within their environment, and begin to unpack that for students. What are they seeing? You know, how are other peers perhaps disconnected? What are those peers experiencing? You know, what do some of those discrepancies look like, and how are students being advocates for one another or using their voice to bring forth inclusion within an environment, and talk through those concerns, because we have students who are disconnected, who are disengaged, who do not feel included, who are internalizing and processing those experiences in ways that manifest into these horrific events. And so we need to be really intentional about those conversations and gain a pulse from the eyes of our children as to what those situations look like from their living experiences.
And I will leave us, sure, yeah. I will leave it with a little bit about what Mr. Taylor said about trusting us, or trusting your kids, but I also want you to trust us. You know, sometimes I think we get into situations where we want to have a battle with our teachers or our administrators or our school resource officers or our administrators about, you know, not my child, or we start to defend some of the behaviors, and just sometimes know that the behaviors are there, and we're not kidding, and be a supportive team. The example that I'll kind of go back to is the messaging. We've talked about the messaging when we put a message out to our district. You know, it's not uncommon for the police chief and for myself, for Dr. Beresford, or Dr. Borf, we all get the message together, and we have a unified message when it goes out. And, you know, sometimes that unified message could come from the schools and from you, and to make sure that our kids understand that, you know, you got their back. Sometimes you're going to have our back too. We appreciate you being here. I'm probably preaching to the choir, but thanks to everybody for doing that part.
We have come to the end of the program tonight, but it's not the end of the effort. It's not the end of school safety conversations. We have collected the questions, we've collected the comments, and we will be publishing those so that you are aware of the comments and the questions that may have been made tonight that were not vocalized. So we will also be working towards expanding our SROs in our district. I do want you to be aware of that. The mayor and I have had those conversations, and of course it's a matter of time before additional members of the Fishers Police Department can be trained. It's a matter of time before we find it within our budget to do all that we would like to do, but expansion will be coming very soon. I'd also like to thank all of you who are here tonight, and all of you who may be watching the live stream. It's important for you to know how important your participation is for all of us. And if I could leave you with a thought too, my experience, not in Hamilton Southeastern, is that the students themselves are very, very fundamental in the safety and security program. My experience was that at a high school where I was superintendent, we did have guns, but they were not brought into the building. They were brought outside. They were stored by bushes. They were stored out by the street. And in every case, it was a student who turned knowledge of it in to our SROs, and we were able to diffuse what could have been a terrible situation. And in every case, it wasn't an adult who solved that. It was a student. And so I encourage parents to talk to your children, let them know how important they are in this overall scheme of school security. They do occupy an important spot. In closing, I want you to know some of us for questions, please come up and talk to us. But thank you very much for being here tonight, and so concludes the meeting.